record for me, will you?
Oh yeah, that would help.
Sorry.
You'd think with the recording in progress thing, I'd like remember.
No.
But yeah, I like hyper focused on finishing on that course, which I finished it and got nothing else done.
Awesome.
Well, I got this
done,
done.
though. Yes. Tell the listeners what you achieved. Ms.
I
Achievement.
completed a long web development online bootcamp that I've been working on since November.
Which I theoretically have been working on for like 2.5 years. So particularly congratulations to you.
Annoyingly though, the final app, you do deploy it as part of the final part of the course, but it's not that there's supposed to be maps on it, and the only place they're working on the deployed version, it's working fine on my local hosted version. On the deployed version, the only place they're working is Chrome browser on the desktop. The one place I could go to check what's fucking wrong with it.
Is it work? Have you tried Firefox?
Yep. Not working.
Because the dev tools are reasonable in Firefox as well.
I didn't know there were Firefox dev tools. I'll have a look at that then.
Have a look through this, yeah. Anyway, come and show your face properly to the camera so that me and the listeners can appreciate that. Oh, that's great. Well done. Very neat.
It looks better on camera than it does in person. You can see all the places I went wrong and had to redo the white in person.
Yeah, I did a little painting of a clown egg, which I will turn into the video intro to this. So.
Hello and welcome to The Truth Shall Make Ye Fret, Down the Rabbit Hole.
Ooh, oh, you told me it wasn't going to be fancy. That's so fancy.
That's the fanciest part of it. This is a bonus
Oh,
month.
Gosh.
This is a boneless podcast.
All efforts have been made to remove bones from this podcast, but no liability is if you find any in your throat.
This is a bonus Patreon-only monthly podcast where we deep dive down the tangents we didn't have time for. I'm Joanna Hagan.
And I'm Francine Carroll. And I'll be shutting up now.
Today we are going from court jesters to clowns.
Oh, hey.
Aren't you excited, Francine?
I am, actually. I am by that font as well. What font is that?
I can't remember what it's called now. I will show you after. It's a nice font though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Okay.
I definitely did not procrasticate on picking a font for like 45 minutes when I should have been.
This is like I told you at the beginning of mine, I refused to do anything apart from pick an inoffensive sans serif font and go from there. But yeah. However, I do appreciate the effort you put in because that's very nice.
I think it's still serif family, to be fair.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so the history of clowns. This is a rough timeline of where we're going, because it turns out clowns go back quite far. So we're starting 5,000-ish years ago in ancient Egypt.
Beautiful.
Popping in on 200-ish BC China. Saying hello to the 2nd, 3rd century in ancient Rome.
Hi, ancient Rome.
And then we're going to hang out in England for a bit for the early Middle Ages. We're going to get slightly European around the late Middle Ages and the 17th, 18th century. We're going to come back to England for a bit of the 19th century, and then we're going to talk about modern day clowns and why they're terrifying.
Fantastic.
I've tried to keep the photos of that section to a minimum because I don't want to disturb our listeners. Obviously, any listeners with coulrophobia,
yeah,
I'm just sorry.
Yeah.
It's not that bad. Any listeners that are just a bit, don't worry, there's not that many pictures. So, 2,500-ish BC in ancient Egypt, we had the Dengas, who were African pygmies who would dance for the pharaohs, quite often wearing leopard skin, and they would dress up as gods and perform little pantomime-type skits.
Huh.
And this is one of the earliest recorded forms of sort of court jester-like entertainment. Entertainers who lived specifically in the court, existed specifically to perform for the heads of the court.
Gosh, voluntarily? I'm guessing not.
I mean, it's 5,000 years ago, so we don't know, but I'm going to go with probably not, because there very much was slavery then.
Yeah.
Probably a bit slavery, but there's also a lot of evidence in hieroglyphics of juggling and acrobatics and... okay, I fucked up some of the transitions. This will go well.
Oh, sorry, just hit my...
But yeah, so there was evidence of juggling and circus-like performance even that long ago. But focusing on jesters for now, that's where we're going to go to ancient China. So jesters have their origin in a similar place to comic actors. And even in the Chinese language, there's not actually really any different. The word for actor and the word for jester is the same word, effectively.
Okay.
Especially when you're looking this far back. The history of acting in China very much came from this comic jester type place, and there were jesters in royal courts. And this is where you see a really, really early example of jesters being the ones free to say something other people couldn't, because they were in a very unique power position of being privy to a lot and very close to the person in power, but posing absolutely no threat.
Yeah. Huh. I like that you've gone in this direction. I was expecting like ancient Greece acting, but this is cool.
That's where we're going next. But so have you heard of, and I'm sorry, I'm going to really, really fuck up the pronunciation here, Xin Huangti?
I have not. Please tell me.
Can you guess what he might have built? He was an emperor.
Okay. No, sorry.
He built the Great Wall of China.
Oh, that one, yeah.
That one.
Okay, yeah.
Quite famous, rather big. So Yu Tzi, and again, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, was his jester.
Okay.
So the Great Wall of China very much could have bankrupted the empire. It cost a lot to build.
Yeah, you can guess. Yeah.
And it cost a lot in people's lives as well.
Yeah.
After it was built, the emperor decided he wanted it to be whitewashed. He wanted the entire thing painted. Obviously, this is a very old story, so this is probably somewhat apocryphal.
I don't care, I like it.
But obviously, everyone around him really wanted to impress on him how bad an idea that was. It was an incredibly stupid idea. It would cost a lot more money when they just spent all this money on this massive fucking wall. And more people would die.
Yeah.
Like, you can't build that something big without, and then whitewash it without a lot of people dying. Fun not fact for the people going, you can see it from space. You can't.
Oh, cool.
Sorry.
I think I knew that, yeah.
That's one of those common misconception things that we like. Anyway, so according to legend, you have Yu Tzi, the jester, who is the one guy who is allowed to tell the truth and can get away with it. So he did a painting on the Great Wall of China of a dick.
Right.
Which comes back to my whole thing about how much I love people because we've been drawing dicks on walls for literally millennia.
Biting political satire. That's
And the story goes that when the emperor threatened to punish him by making him paint the wall, he responded that he was the wrong clown for the job because he was colorblind. But obviously news of this argument spread around the course and then, of course, around the rest of the empire. And the emperor realized that he kind of looked like a dick. And because of that, he chose not to whitewash the Great Wall of China.
Great.
And millions more people didn't die and millions more weren't spent.
Good. Okay. Yes. Well done him with the dick pic.
Well done, you'd say. Anyway, jumping forward, ancient Rome and Greece.
Wait.
So ancient Rome, they both had big theatre scenes and big comic scenes, but actors were treated very differently. In Greece, they were really respected. You were quite high in society to be an actor. In Rome, they were criminals or prostitutes. They were that level, and quite often slaves. So we have a couple of things that come from ancient Greek and ancient Rome. One being the circus. The Circus Maximus was a very famous part of ancient Rome. That's a reconstruction of it there. These were not places for clowns to perform. These were horse tricks and fake battles would be staged. They would sometimes be not just the Circus Maximus, but there were a lot of these existed. They weren't always round, but they were big staging areas. Although it has the same sort of etymological origin as circle.
Yeah.
But there were even some that were built so that they could be flooded, so they could recreate naval battles.
Wow.
So it was kind of a mix of entertainment and training.
Jesus. That's such a spectacle.
This was huge, huge stuff. But then they were used as sort of gathering places and marketplaces the rest of the time.
In ancient after that one, I guess.
Yeah. In ancient Greece, you get the beginnings of mime. And the name actually comes from a single masked dancer who would perform often called pantomimus. And that's where we get pantomime.
Vetinari doesn't like this.
Vetinari does not like this. I haven't gone too far into mime, but the performances weren't always silent. Bathyllus of Alexandria is the person credited with creating very specifically comic mime performances. Although again, it wasn't always silent. The whole idea of mime being silent is early Middle Ages with mummers plays and mummery, and they were silent.
Okay. Does mama come from mime?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It comes from the same place. But this sort of went over to ancient Rome. It became an aspect of Roman theatre, and it was the most prominent kind of drama under the empire. It wasn't necessarily comedy, but the specific idea of mime theatre up to around sort of 3rd century AD. But comic theatre was also a huge thing. And in Roman comic theatre, you'd have these stock characters, one of which was the fool.
Yeah.
The rustic fool, specifically.
Okay.
And this is where we start to get the really early origins of jesters. You did also have in Rome paid jesters or paid idiots. They were called the ballatrones, and they would be hired. The ballatrones. No one's quite sure exactly where the name comes from. It's a couple of weird allegorical stories that it comes from a person's actual name. No one's sure. One of the most popular theories is that it comes from bellare, which was Latin for the noise a sheep makes. Because they were idiots just making noises, and they would be hired to perform in people's houses and at dinners.
And is this like just bumbling around kind of?
Bumbling around,
humor?
Telling jokes, falling over, slapstick.
Yeah, yeah.
This is very, very early slapstick. But in ancient Rome, because actors were so low class, you would have purges. While mime and dramatic theatre, specifically comic actors, were the lowest of the low, although mime and dramatic theatre went in and out of fashion. At one point, Nero liked acting and performing. But you would have these actors' purges where they'd be driven out of cities, which led to troops of travelling comic actors. And that's what started spreading this idea of comic acting, and especially jestery and buffoonery, into the rest of Europe, including into the UK.
I'm just writing down more things to add to your business card.
Professional
buffoonery.
These business cards are getting really big. I have like an A4 business card.
Oh no.
I mean, you're designing it. I hope you know this.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. This is one day going to be a present for you.
I'm so excited for this. Anyway, so that's where jesters and buffoons and idiots exist everywhere, but this particular sort of idiot starts spreading out into the rest of Europe and ends up coming to Britain, which takes us to the early Middle Ages. So we're talking early medieval, 11th, 12th century. And at this point, I'm going to clarify to the listeners that I am not a historian. So if I fuck up what an age is called compared to what the century is, I'm very sorry. I don't know things, and my research didn't go in that direction.
Yes, that's all right. I've noticed our listeners are very nice with their corrections. So
they are very nice, and I greatly appreciate it.
That's a fairly terrifying photo you've got there. Not photo, obviously, you know what I mean.
Not a photograph. Yeah, so we have 3 photographs here. We have, none of them are photographs. They're all paintings.
Sorry, I've thrown you off. I'll shut up.
We have an early medieval fool in the traditional jester's costume of the time, which was, I've written this down somewhere, but quite often a shaved head and then a hat with donkey's ears or ass's ears.
Okay.
In the middle, we have a depiction of a banquet featuring many types of musicians, including, if you can see, you might have to zoom in a bit, but on the far right of the painting, flatulentists.
Oh, yes, I see, yeah.
You can see the men with their cheeks spread there. Mm-hmm. And on the right, we have a goose. I will explain the goose. So in the early Middle Ages, you have minstrels, and minstrel is kind of a catch-all title. It comes from little servant, and that means any kind of performer. Because quite often these performers, you would have professional jesters, but they would very rarely just be jesters, because big daily banquets weren't a thing in the 11th and 12th century. So they would be a jester or some kind of comic performer when there's a banquet on, and the rest of the time they would be shoveling shit or lighting candles or what have you. So in the 11th century, we have a diversity win. The first recorded jester is a woman. In 1086, in some property records, we see a woman named Adeline provide her profession as a joculatrix.
Oh, I like that.
And if that's not your word of the day, that is my favourite word in this entire presentation.
Nice. Okay, written that one down.
Around the early 12th century, we start seeing the title of follis being used, which follis being used, but it comes from the Latin follis, which means bag of wind, and that's also where we get the word folly. Folly was obviously used, of the follies, but also the architectural thing, but they both come from that same root. An architectural folly is something built for no reason. They're quite often little podium type things with columns. They were really popular in especially the Victorian era.
There's little curiosities for people to come across as they wander the grounds kind of thing.
Exactly. And then you have the folly performance, which comes very much from this place.
Okay.
So that's early 12th century. I can't remember what I put on these slides. Cool. In the early 12th century, we have a Roland le Fateur, Roland the Farter.
Oh.
That's why we have
Everything sounds nicer in French.
Yes. He was a famous flatulentist who Henry II gave 30 acres of land, provided that he would return to court every Christmas to leap, whistle, and fart.
Superb.
And then as we get to the 13th century, fools and jesters start to gain this sort of star status. Tom le Fol was a famous recorded one who performed at the wedding feast of Edward I's daughter. I'm not sure which one, he had a few. And he was paid 50 shillings, which, for context, a goose at the time was worth 1.5 pence. So he was paid the equivalent of 400 geese.
Huh. Was that a common metric used for salaries?
No, I couldn't find an inflation rate that told me what a medieval shilling was worth now, so I just went with the goose calculation.
Oh, it's a lovely picture of a goose.
I also just wanted to get some medieval bestiary in here somewhere, because
I thought we were going to go down the you're a horrible goose. It's a lovely day in the 13th century court, and you are a horrible goose.
You have 400 horrible geese.
Yes.
For one night's work. Like, imagine getting paid with, like, I don't know what the cash value now is of 400 geese, but I imagine it's quite a lot. I don't think geese are cheap.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to be a decent amount, isn't it?
Yeah. So imagine getting paid in 400 geese for one night's work.
Yeah.
I mean, I know some comedians do get paid a lot, but so yeah, that's Tom de Fol. So this, like I said, this is when fools become star people. They're paid a lot more, but they also take on more responsibility. Rather than shoveling a shit whenever there isn't a huge banquet, they have their own role in the court. And this is what I was talking about earlier, because they're close to this position of power, but they're not a threat. Whereas everyone else who is close to the king or queen of the time will have, or any nobleman, any duke, will have their own agendas and their own potential want to usurp, because they'll be close family.
Okay.
Or just in that position to try and take that power in some way. I mean, these are when land skirmishes happen constantly. So the fool becomes kind of an unofficial courtly advisor, because he's in this unique position of not being threatening at all, being privy to all of this information, and being able to get away with saying pretty much whatever he wants, because that's his job, as long as it's funny enough to make the person paying him laugh.
God, it just seems like such a tenuous position, though, doesn't it?
It does. Well, they were also in quite a lot of danger. When you have a nobleman or a king traveling to a battlefield, fools would go with them. And they'd be messengers on the battlefields. They'd be carrying things like ransom demands, as well as trying to build up morale of the troops. They would be not just performing for the troops, but they'd be trying to mess with the morale of the other side.
Right.
Trying to get them to charge too soon, or try and confuse them when they're about to charge. So they were kind of used in like psychological warfare.
Little trickster gods.
Tiny little trickster gods. We will get on to trickster gods.
Ooh. Sorry, I keep accidentally foreshadowing.
It's fine, I quite like it. Anyway, so this takes us to later in the Middle Ages and across Europe, because like I said, we don't just have this in England, but this is the English role they have. Mm-hmm. So across Europe, we've got 3 types of fool. The professional, which is the kind I've been talking about, employed by noblemen to perform at parties and act as advisors and carry ransom demands. We have the not diversity win, the pet. You would have wealthy families who would adopt basically very mentally ill people and treat them as something of a pet. And then you have the third class, which is the performer. And these are these fool societies that exist all across Europe, but especially in France. And they're amateur groups that perform at fairs, they perform at Christmas, they put on these comedic plays on the street, quite often improvised, they're not these scripted things.
Okay.
They tie into sort of morality plays of the day. And this is where you start to see the traditional sort of jester motley that we picture when we think of him as a jester.
Is this like the kind of thing that Patrick Rothfuss was drawing on for his Quoth travelling band of?
Well, there were all sorts of travelling performers, but these were very specifically jester type performers, and they'd wear these sorts of outfits. So you'd have the hat with 3 points on it, and there'd be a bell on each point, and that would partly be so people could hear them coming.
You don't want to be surprised by
You don't want to be surprised by this. They'd have bells tied to their shoes. They'd have these multicoloured tunics. And they quite often, although they were amateur groups, you know, they would take these collections, they would make good money from it. And although the dyes themselves were hard to come by, these were quite often naturally dyed, sewn themselves, or scraps of fabric given to them from estates they passed through.
Cool.
And then we'd start moving towards the, we've got etymology.
Ooh.
I don't remember what I put in this. My notes are a mess. Do not look at them.
Okay.
This is where, so as we're in the Elizabethan period, jesters start moving towards this kind of stage acting. But this is where we start seeing the word clown for the first time.
Right, okay.
It has vaguely existed around before, but one of the first recorded, seeing it written down, is in 1560, and it's used to mean peasant.
Right.
And the theoretical etymology, again, no one's completely sure, is that it's cognate with an old Scandinavian word that meant clumsy.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this idea of slang for a clumsy peasant, basically. That's where we first see it written down. But then you have Shakespeare, of course.
Of course.
And Shakespeare was one of the first people who started referring to fools, the fool characters in his plays, as clowns.
Right.
And that's where we start seeing clown and jester conflated. That's where we get clown meaning this kind of comic performer.
Good old Shakespeare.
Obviously, there's lots of other language evolution happening. So quite often when I start talking about the late Middle Ages, when I say these group are known as the clowns, they are known as the Italian equivalent of this word.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we start using it in England. And of course, Shakespeare starts using, by this point, the fool as a nobleman's advisor and thing has really fallen out of fashion. It's not very common.
Right.
But Shakespeare starts using these characters in his plays as a way to provide a voice of reason in
it's a nice
comedic way.
Yeah, it's a nice device.
Like the most famous one probably being, well, you have King Lear,
mm-hmm.
who has his fool, who ends up being the sane, rational one who cares for him when King Lear loses his mind in the thunderstorm. And then you also have the fun, well, I say fun, you have the dead one in Hamlet. I don't mean fun as in it's fun, but the alas poor
It's a
Yorick.
fun example to use.
It's a fun example. I don't have a skull handy, and we did say we'd keep this boneless. But the alas poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio. Hamlet does this soliloquy about the jester from his youth, and you see him go through an entire emotional journey through mourning that character. And so he manages to use these kind of jester characters without them even being on stage. But obviously, like I said, it's really fallen out of fashion. And the last professional jester, the last recorded professional jester, was Samuel Maggotty Johnson, who was born in 1691.
Good Lord.
Yeah. The Duke of Montague is his patron, and he lived on the Duke's estate. I can't remember what it's called. It's the Geshware estate or something. You can still visit it now. It's a National Trust property now, but you can visit his grave.
Lots of interesting historical things about the Montagues. Not for today,
yes.
But yes.
There's many a Montague.
Oh.
He was called Maggotty because he had a rather unpleasant face by the sound of it.
Oh.
He would write these truly terrible plays, but the Duke would arrange for them to be staged. You'd have like 30 odd performances of each, which was a lot for the time in big theatres in London. He would sing, but he would sing facing away from the audience because the audience would laugh at him, and he thought it was because of these ridiculous faces he was pulling while he was singing.
Okay.
And it wasn't, it was just, he was not good, he was bad. There's a lot of writing at the time, sort of like
Ooh.
part of why he was so funny is that he didn't understand why he was so funny.
Oh no.
But saying that, he did very well for himself. Like I said, he was the last ever recorded jester. He lived until the age of 82.
Oh, good lad.
And like I said, you can still visit. This is his grave now in Geshware Forest. This is the inscription on his grave, which is great. It's a long thing, so I'll read it out. Under this stone rest the remains of Mr. Samuel Johnson, afterwards ennobled with the grander title of Lord Flame,
Ooh.
who, after having been in his life distinct from other men by the eccentricities of his genius, chose to retain the same character after his death, and was at his own desire buried here, May 5th, age 52. And the poem on here: stay thou whom chance directs or ease persuades, to seek the quiet of these sylvan glades. Here, undisturbed and hid from vulgar eyes, a wit, musician, poet, player lies. A dancing master too, in grace he shone, and all the arts of opera were his own. In comedy, well skilled, he drew Lord Flame, acted the part and gained himself the name. Averse to strife, how oft he'd gravely say these peaceful groves should shade his breathless clay, that when he rose again, laid here alone, no friend and he should quarrel for a bone. Thinking that were some old lame gossip nigh, she might possibly take his leg or thigh.
What? Really nice poem until the end. Now I have no idea what's happened.
Unfortunately, not boneless.
Oh.
I tried so hard.
It's lucky
and
you
got
put that
so
disclaimer
far.
at the beginning.
Never thought we'd need it, and yet here we are. So while he was partly funny for not being very funny, he was incredibly confident, and it served him incredibly well.
Yeah.
I mean, living into your 80s in that day and age alone is fairly impressive. He kept his patronage the entire time. He retired to that estate and was looked after.
Great.
So yeah, but obviously, like I said,
good for him.
Jesterdom has started to die out, especially in England, because obviously there's a civil war, 1642 to 1651.
Oh yeah,
that
happened.
Jesters and comedy and fun sort of fell out of fashion with the Puritans. Luckily, some of Europe is more fun, and this takes us to 17th, 18th century Europe. The Commedia dell'arte. So, like I said, this translates as...
didn't you?
I did. So this translates as, the comedy of the profession.
Mm-hmm.
So professional jesterdom has very much died out in the UK, but versions of the travelling jester exist across Europe, right from those fool societies that we had earlier in the Middle Ages. And this brings us to the Commedia dell'arte, which translates as comedy of the profession and was known as Italian comedy quite often in the UK, although it wasn't just Italian. So you'd have these stock character groups. You have the Vecchi, who were wealthy old men. These were characters like Il Dottore and Pantalone. My Italian is really bad. I'm very sorry. You have the Innamorati, who are these young upper-class lovers.
Uh-huh.
Il Capitano, who are these captains or bosses. And this was all, all the stuff about women not being allowed on stage in the UK. This wasn't a thing. You would have these women playing these fantastic bosses. And you'd have the Zanni, who were the servants and clown-type characters.
Okay.
And that's where we get the Harlequin from. All these characters, these actors would perform with masks on. And it's kind of understood that comes from Venice and the whole Carnival thing.
Okay.
And you have, like I said, these stock characters, you'd get these different versions of them. So from the clown stock, you get the Harlequin character. And then you'd have sort of sub-Harlequins. You'd have these famous characters who sort of fit into the Harlequin box. One of the most famous was Arlecchino, who's described as wearing a costume covered in irregular patches, a hat outfitted with either a rabbit or fox's tail, and a red and black mask. And that's where we start seeing the sort of diamond motley from where we had the earlier jester pointy hat and bells clothes.
Okay.
And there are lots of other sort of stock Harlequin characters. One of them was Truffaldino, and there was an actor who loved playing specifically this Truffaldino version of the Harlequin so much that he asked Goldini to write him a play. And Goldini wrote The Servant of Two Masters, which is a fairly famous 18th century farce. You might have heard of the James Corden thing, One Man, Two Governors.
Sorry.
It's a fairly famous play, but it is based on The Servant of Two Masters. I've also got a huge soft spot for it because I was in it when I was 15. Cool. It's a very funny play. It's very silly. It's farcy. I played this woman who's pretending to be her dead brother to try and she's pretending she's going to marry this bird just so she can quickly get the inheritance, but then she can run away with the man she really loves, who may or may not have killed her brother, but he's on the run, so she needs the money.
Cool, yeah.
And this guy ends up being a servant to like this woman and her not dead lover that she thinks might be dead or may have killed her brother. And it's lots of silly. So this is this Truffaldino character. But yeah, so these were quite often, they were improvised performances. So there'd be a rough kind of, okay, this has got to happen at the start and it's got to end up like this. And these are the exits and entrances. And these are your characters. You know, you need to be the Harlequin, the trickster. You need to be Pantalone. You need to be the old man. You need to be the inamorati. You two are the lovers, and everyone's trying to keep you apart, and you've got to end up together. But that would be pretty much it. And then everyone would run on stage and do their thing. So to use Seven and Two Masters as an example, you have this Truffaldino character who is the Harlequin trickster, who's working for two people. He's the servant. You have the two masters, and they're one set of the inamorati. They're in love with each other. You have another young couple, and then you have the Pantalone character, who is this father of a young girl, and he's trying to marry her off to the woman pretending to be her dead brother, but this young girl wants to marry someone else.
Okay.
But this brings us to, coming back to the UK, we get the Harlequinade.
Right.
And this is what happens when the Commedia dell'arte comes to the UK. And so it first reaches the UK in like the late 17th century, but it's the 18th century where it really starts taking off. These performances were often mimed because quite often the actors wouldn't speak any English, especially in the early Harlequin, the early Commedia dell'arte performances. That's kind of where we start getting pantomime from.
Okay.
But the Harlequinade kind of becomes its own very British thing. It's described in the Oxford English Dictionary as that part of a pantomime in which the Harlequin and the clown play the principal parts. So again, so it's a particular style of pantomime, and again, you have stock characters. So in this case, what we have is the Harlequin, the clown, Pantalone, and Columbine.
Okay.
In the traditional story, Columbine is the daughter of Pantalone. The Harlequin is in love with Columbine. The clown is Pantalone's servant and exists to try and help Pantalone keep Columbine and the Harlequin apart. And so then you'd have these long, fancy, elaborate stories. Again, quite often tons and tons of improv in there. But that was the very basics of it. And again, you also have Piero the servant. And Piero the servant and the clown character would quite often be one and the same. And Piero would quite often have this white face paint on, and this is where we start seeing the clown makeup exist. But around this time as well, we have, so we have the introduction of the clown as a scruffy idiot as a counterpart to the Harlequin, who is this sort of charming trickster.
Right. Okay.
And then we get to the circus.
Yay.
So this is,
I mean, there's a lot of animal cruelty I can see in that picture.
Yeah, we don't get to the nice sort of circus yet, but what we start getting is the traditional circus in the round. So you have this guy, Philip Astley's, in 1768. He's an ex-cavalry officer who's really good at doing cool riding tricks.
Okay.
And these performances of men who could do cool stuff on horseback were quite popular. But he was really good at doing it in a circle.
Okay.
And he was loaded. So he built this modern amphitheatre to show off horse riding tricks.
Cool.
And then he started needing things to fill in between acts. So he starts bringing in clowns. He starts bringing in comic performers. And not clowns in this traditional face paint because we don't have this yet, but these comic performers who would do slapstick stuff. He starts bringing in acrobats. And this is when we get the foundation of the traditional circus.
Okay.
He wasn't the first person to put this sort of thing on, but he was the first to kind of bring it all into this one cohesive show and landed on this format of performing in the round. And that's where we start getting these huge purpose-built circular theatres. Like the London Hippodrome that's what it started as.
Oh.
Yeah. And these massive purpose-built amphitheatres, and they would house this combo of circus, which would be things like these trick riding acts and acrobatics and comic performances and variety theatre would end up being performed in there as well. And you'd have menageries, which is where you start getting this whole idea of animals at the circus.
Yeah, okay.
Because traveling menageries were quite a thing. So this is where it all starts coming together into this cohesive whole performance.
So they'd be like guest spots in a static theatre.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. God,
And
this
this
is a
is
nightmare to bloody organise every week, wouldn't it? Just logistically, I'm not.
And this starts mushing together into lots of different ideas of traveling performers, of traveling menageries, traveling comic performers, traveling acrobats, who would start to mush themselves together into these big round tents. And that really took off when it went across the pond over into the States.
That's really interesting that it started as a static thing and kind of evolved back into traveling.
Yeah, it was, you'd have all of these traveling performers coming together into the static phase, and they'd befriend each other. And then, so it's when it goes, I didn't go as far into this. I went more in the clown direction, but I wanted to look at the circus bit because we're looking at circus clowns. When it goes to the States that it starts becoming a traveling thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because it is cheaper to have a big tent and travel across this huge country than it is to build one theatre and hope everyone's going to come to you.
Yeah, for sure. There's just too much distance between each town, isn't there?
Yeah, especially if you're looking like 1768 is when they start performing. So you'll talk very early 19th century. There are big population centres, but nothing like now.
Yeah.
And London has enough people passing through it because England is so small.
Right. Yes, of course. Yeah. And
Whereas
the hub. Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at something like New York, there aren't a lot of people passing through New York.
Yeah, they'd be going to the hub closer to their part of the...
Exactly. Which, don't get me wrong, there were still big theatres and things in the States, but that's where you start getting the travelling circus.
Awesome.
Anyway, this is not a presentation on circus history.
Sorry, I keep dragging you off into the tangents.
Do you have any idea how many tangents nearly spun off this tangent?
I could guess, knowing your interest.
If I had time to have done a presentation that was like twice the length, I probably would have done, but I think you'd have hurt me.
Oh, that's fine. I'm not doing any research or editing.
I was going to say, this doesn't need a lot of editing. Although, speaking of editing, should we quickly grab another coffee?
Yes, all right, my love.
Right, sorry, where are we? We are at the circus, aren't we?
Oh, good.
So, we have the precursor to the modern circus. And at the moment, we have a scruffy clown in the Harlequinade who assists Pantalone with keeping the Harlequin and Columbine apart.
Okay.
And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle that gets us to the modern circus clown, which is Joseph Grimaldi.
That guy. I've heard of him.
You will hopefully remember this name from my previous small presentation on clown eggs.
Mm-hmm.
I promise that's going to be the only mention of them. So we get this huge sea change with Joseph Grimaldi in 1800. Basically, he played the clown in Charles Dibdin's pantomime, Peter Wilkins, or Harlequin in the Flying World.
Ooh.
And Dibdin's
He's got a
introduced...
duck in his pocket, sorry.
No, he's just pleased to see you.
Oh.
So in this production, Dibdin introduced a new costume design, whereas before the clown was this very scruffy servant. In this, he is wearing this huge, garish, colourful outfit, and this became so trendy it started being used in these Harlequinade performances across loads of different theatres.
Oh.
So later that same year at the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane, which is one of the most famous places for theatre in London.
It's where the Muffin Man lives.
It is where the Muffin Man lives. Well done. Grimaldi played the clown again in Harlequin Hamlet, or The Magic of Mona. And in this, the whole concept of these stock characters was slightly rewritten. So the Harlequin character was made less of a trickster and more of this very dreamy romantic. He exists in this play to pine over Columbine. And the Grimaldi's clown character, because Grimaldi was such an amazing comic actor, became the agent of chaos and started this huge trend where in the Harlequinade, the clown became the anarchic fun character so that the Harlequin could moon over Columbine.
Oh.
And Grimaldi was really the one who combined all of this into the clown archetype. He took the comic acting and he took the slapstick and he took this costume that Charles Dibdin designed and this makeup, this white face with red cheeks, red lips, and these dark eyebrows.
This good contour he's got going on.
Very good contour. It's a solid aesthetic. I very nearly did this, but I'm out of white face paint.
Yeah. Fair.
Also, I did my makeup in 10 minutes before we started recording. But he really created this archetype, and it became hugely trendy. Everyone started writing their harlequinades to fit these new stereotypes, where the clown was the anarchic fun one. The costume started really being based on this, and this is where it all comes together into this circus clown that we know today. So this is where we get from the court jester to the circus clown. It really all came together with Joseph Grimaldi, and so Joey is still used as slang for clown in his honor.
Is it?
Mostly within clown circles, and they'll call each other Joeys.
Okay.
At this point where I start talking about clowning, it's very hard for it not to sound a bit ridiculous or like I'm talking about another species. But the reason I mentioned Joseph Grimaldi back when we were talking about the eggs and the museum is because Joseph Grimaldi, when did he die? He died in 1837. He was buried at St James's Church in London, and that's why it became the traditional clown church. And that's it's no longer the traditional clown church. It burned down or something. It's deconsecrated now, so it moved to a bigger church, which I can't remember the name of now, but I did mention when I was talking about the eggs.
Telling me the haunted clown church burnt down and is deconsecrated. Standing to the creepy column here.
I'm trying to keep most of the creepy column out of it.
No, I'm enjoying the mixture.
So the big clown memorial service is still held every year in his honor. So that's why we talked about Grimaldi before. But this all really brings us to the modern circus clown. So modern day clowns, there are three classic types of modern day clowns, especially within circus. You have the white face clown, and this is this kind of aesthetic, this white face, dark eyebrows. This is where Dr. Whiteface gets his name from. This is
and
the boss,
look, I'm guessing.
And his look. This is the boss clown. This is the one that doesn't get messy. This is where a lot of the traditional mime aesthetic evolved from as well, because you're talking, these are fairly concurrent, 18th, 19th to early 20th century for the mime we know now. And yeah, the aesthetic very much originated with Grimaldi, especially the makeup. And then you have the Auguste clown, which is this kind of, this is just a stock photo, but this is this kind of flesh tone, but then with exaggerated features.
Sure.
And these are the scruffier, more slapstick clowns. These are the ones that get the buckets of whitewash down the trousers.
This Three Stooges kind of humour.
Yeah, the clumsy one. One of the most famous of these was Alberto Fratellini, and he is famously credited with originating the red nose.
Okay.
He was from a huge performing family and was one of the first sort of known Auguste clowns. The name comes from German slang for a stupid person, effectively.
That's interesting, because it's August is kind of dignified here, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm assuming there's some play on words happening. So with the white face, like I said, very much a look that originated with Grimaldi. I don't know how much of it was him and how much of it was Charles Dibdin, who chose to put him in this look for that first play in 1800. So it'd be a very white base, thick eyebrows, red triangles on the cheeks, and large red lips. And that particular makeup aesthetic, again, kind of comes from the Harlequinade, from this Pierrot character. So it's sometimes known as the Pierrot clown. And then, yeah, the Auguste, in earlier circusy times, this came from these slapstick performers who'd be very much the butt of the joke. And then we have the third archetype, which is the character clown. And these would be clowns that are mostly based on professions. So you have the... I'm going to get into context of why I've specifically used this picture. The character clowns are, like I said, based around professions. So you'd have these policemen clowns or butchers. Bearing in mind that this stuff that came over from the Commedia dell'arte, the Harlequin and everything, is also how we end up with things like Punch and Judy. And the aesthetics of those as well. But some people talk about modern day clowning specifically and say there are four types. You have the white face, the Auguste, the character, and the hobo/tramp clown. But popularly, they're actually a subset of the character clown. So this is Emmett Kelly, and he was an American clown from the late 19th, early 20th century who created, he created this hobo clown character based off the tramps he saw traveling during the Depression that was happening in the US in those days. And it's become a very, very famous stock character clown, this idea of the tramp clown. Charlie Chaplin played with it, among others. And it's quite a sort of well-known image of this very, very scruffy clown who would So that's where the evolution came from. So this is what modern day clowning is now, and this is how we got there from court jesters.
Very cool.
And this is really where we get the makeup from. This very much came from Europe in the 17th, 18th century. Jesters traditionally weren't made up. They wore these ridiculous outfits, but they wouldn't have painted faces. And this is why the whole reason I wanted to go down this tangent and this rabbit hole is because I was confused. Obviously, my research into the whole thing about the eggs and saving the faces for posterity, according to Annotated Pratchett, came from a much older tradition. I cannot see any evidence of that because I can't see much evidence of clowns having their own distinct paint any earlier than the 20th century.
Yeah, and it looks like it's just one of those things that got written down somewhere and repeated then.
Yeah. I'm very curious as to what their source was, and unfortunately I have no way of contacting them.
Email?
I don't even know if the email's still active.
Oh yeah, maybe not actually. Yeah.
Anyway, so this brings us to where I said I wanted to get to, modern day clowns. I could have done a whole separate presentation on modern day clowns in pop culture.
Thank you for not.
No, but I do want to briefly look at the other half of that final point I had on the timeline, which is why they're terrifying. Look, I chose the least scary pictures I could. This is the Joker and Pennywise from the film It.
Yeah.
Marvelously portrayed by Tim Curry, although the new It films are fine as well. So
a glowing recommendation.
Going way back into clowns as a feature of horror, we're going back to Edgar Allan Poe in 1849 and his short story Hop Frog.
Not familiar.
That's not to say that terrifying clowns didn't exist in pop culture before that, but it's one of the earliest very clear things that we can point to and say, this is where scary clowns are. And it's all to do with subverting this trope of taking something funny and making it terrifying. So the story of Hop Frog, the title character, Hop Frog, is a person with dwarfism who's taken from his homeland and becomes the jester of a king, a very cruel king who's particularly fond of practical jokes. He has another friend in this court because this king apparently has a thing for collecting people with dwarfism, this woman Tripetta. And the king strikes Tripetta. And so as revenge in this short story, he dresses the king and all of his cabinet as orangutans for a masquerade, and then murders them all by setting their costumes on fire before escaping with his girlfriend.
I had heard this, yeah.
We are not going to discuss Edgar Allan Poe writing about orangutans.
Okay.
There's a great Tumblr post around, I'll see if I can find it for the show notes, but there's another story involving Poe and orangutans, and one of the biggest debates in academic circles, especially with Poe scholars and whether or not Poe was racist, this is the story that always gets held up, and to the point where like it's banned from discussion at Poe conferences.
Because it's racist? Or?
Basically.
Okay.
But like the sort of, you mention it to an intense Poe scholar who's been to a few of those conferences and you'll get like a traumatized 1,000-yard stare.
Oh.
It's a very contentious discussion, apparently.
Goodness me.
But I do love the really haunting line from the story of Hop Frog. As for myself, I am simply Hop Frog the jester, and this is my last jest. So then we get into Pagliacci, an Italian opera that first premiered in 1892, about a murderous clown.
Good, right.
That very much used the whiteface aesthetic of Grimaldi. This is where we start seeing specifically the clown makeup come into pop culture as something of horror.
Okay.
Pagliacci is throughout the opera always with his white face and his painted on eyebrows and his painted on lips. And that somewhat adds to the horror of this murderous clown. So this is specifically seeing clown makeup come into pop culture. And then 50 years later, you have the Joker, who first appeared in a comic book in 1940. And the Joker is...
That's quite early, isn't it?
It's very early. It's very weird to think how close 1892 and 1940 are. Yeah. If you then think about 1940 and its relation to 1990, and we were born in the 90s.
Yeah, mental. Huh.
So less than 100 years after Edgar Allan Poe's story Hop Frog, we have the Joker, this villainous character who it's never agreed on who actually came up with the Joker and how he came about. The two artists and the writer who are involved in that first comic cannot agree on who came up with it, and all have their own story for why they came up with it. So there was some inspiration from a particularly creepy Joker playing card.
Right.
And yet, so he is more of a jester than a clown, but he very much has that creepy traditional clown makeup, and there's lots of different origin stories for it. But he exists as this subversive character of chaos, which very much goes back to the Harlequinade clown.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of played up on throughout, isn't it? It's the agent of chaos rather than vendetta.
Yeah. And then we have, this is one I won't go into in depth because it's quite depressing, but Pogo the Clown, who was a serial killer from the 1970s.
Oh yeah, there's a good All Killer No Filler episode on that.
It's an interesting story, but I won't go into it here because I'm sure some of our listeners really don't want to hear it.
Yeah. By the way, just the Hop Frog thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you look into Peter the Great's dwarf wedding?
No, I didn't.
That? I'll send you a link to that. I reckon, I can't remember enough of the details to be sure on this, but I reckon there might be some inspiration there because there was a Russian Tsar who was particularly unkind to his dwarfish collection of entertainers.
Yeah. It's very difficult to discuss these things that very weren't PC in PC terms.
Yeah, no. I mean, obviously, he was a cunt, but
feels like this goes without saying.
Yeah.
Collecting people with traits that make them different, not good.
Not great. Yeah.
So we have Pogo the Clown, and of course we have It, Stephen King's novel released in 1988, which features Pennywise the Clown.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That went in that order.
Yep. So this very much played on this idea of something that should be friendly, being actually very terrifying, and it's very well done, especially in the movie for It, because it's Tim Curry, and he does everything incredibly well. God, I love Tim Curry. I very nearly just put some extra pictures of Tim Curry in the end here, just to cheer us all up after we'd looked at the clowns.
Sorry, we can all imagine him.
Because on first glance, he looks like a kid's birthday clown. So we look at that now and find it creepy. But even as far back as the 80s, that was not automatically a creepy image because...
No, I mean, the media hype around Pogo kind of started cementing it, didn't it? And then...
Yeah. And like I said, there were sinister clowns before that and sinister jesters before that, but that very much cemented the horror clown in the public image in a very clever way. And if you look at the picture I've got there of Tim Curry, it's very much the white-faced clown makeup.
Yeah.
So it's not just the clown, it's the clown who is meant to be just staying slightly out of the mess and not being too clumsy. It's the competent clown, which I think adds to the horror of it.
For sure, yeah. Yeah. Do you think the kind of contrast between something that's meant to be like an innocent thing and the horror kind of helps with that as well?
Absolutely. It's the same reason you have creepy China dolls are always really great as a horror trope. Look at the twins in The Shining, creepy young girls speaking in unison. It's a fun trope. I'm not a big horror fan, but it's one I always really enjoy because it's always... A, it's so jarring, and B, because it now makes you find those things creepy in day-to-day life. Like a China doll never isn't creepy. Yeah,
agreed, yeah.
And eventually I will finish writing the sitcom I started about someone who finds a haunted China doll and ends up befriending it.
All right.
I will get there.
Don't get me re-hyped about that before you get somewhere.
It gets so gay in series 2.
I know, you keep selling me.
Someone commission me. Oh, I could actually write it as a radio play. Right, we're not doing this now. I am focused.
You've already got a radio play on the go.
Stop writing. I really need to stop writing radio plays. Okay, this brings us down. The last thing I want to talk about, because it is one of my favourite ridiculous things that people do, is the Great Clown Panic of 2016.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Do you remember this?
I do. Oh, the innocent times.
Remember when that was the biggest thing we had to worry about in 2016?
What, 2016?
I think that was before Bowie had died.
Right, but after Brexit and Trump.
Oh yeah, good point. Remember 2015?
Oh, wasn't that nice? Yeah.
So there was actually a precursor to the Great Clown Planet, the Great Clown Panic of 2016.
Well,
Back in
Planet, I don't like the sound of.
We must never go there. Okay, so do you remember back in 2013, Facebook pages were a much bigger deal. There would be a big thing of making a Facebook page that was something like this, if you agree that this character from Family Guy is a twat, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And these pages existed because people would build up like 1 million likes and then sell the page.
Yes.
And use it for advertising. And it's not a thing anymore because now it's much easier to just advertise on Facebook. Facebook is just adverts now.
Yeah.
And there is nothing you can do to your timeline to really fix that. Although I do love the weird things that are advertised to me on Facebook. Yeah. But so back in 2013, it was a big deal to build up traffic to a Facebook page.
Sure.
And in Northampton, there started being mysterious clown sightings.
Northampton, England?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was a bunch of guys. So you started having these mysterious clown sightings. So then a Facebook page springs up for the Northampton Clown. And it turns out it's a bunch of guys going out into the woods and filming this and trying to build up this hype around it to build a bunch of traffic to a Facebook page.
Oh, fuck me. I don't like that story at all.
And then in 2016, you get the Great Clown Panic. And this is where mysterious clown sightings started happening first in the States. And it started in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And it spread across the States. It spread to Europe. It spread to the UK. I think it even spread to places like Australia. I think Japan probably already had some weird clown.
They're way ahead of us with panic.
Yeah, they're way ahead. They've already had a clown panic. But it started in Green Bay, Wisconsin as a marketing stunt for a horror film, like a small indie thing.
Right.
It was a viral marketing stunt. But then people jumped on this bandwagon, and so there started being mysterious clown sightings because people thought, oh, this is cool. I'm going to go dress up as a clown and get people to see me. And there ended up being this huge media hype. Everyone was terrified. Costume shops stopped selling clown costumes.
Huh.
Huge international clown organizations had to put out statements saying, like, it's not us and we don't condone it.
Oh, no.
And everyone was just on the lookout for creepy clowns, and everyone was trying to get clown costumes and dressing up as creepy clowns and lurking. And of course, there's all this ridiculous hype. Was it a satanic cult? Were they murderers? Was there going to be violence? There was huge police presences around Halloween looking for violent clowns. There were people, there were mobs with baseball bats going out clown hunting.
I was going to say, I feel like the one bit of violence was a clown that got beaten up, right? Some kid playing pranks who got properly beaten up by some dude.
Yeah. People ended up violently attacking clowns on the spot. And again, it's really hard to talk about this because it sounds like I'm talking another species and I'm not. But it massively hurt the professional clowning industry.
Oh my God.
There was huge damage to it, all because of hype that started as a viral marketing stunt.
It's interesting that the clown industry is one of the few that is not all publicity is good publicity.
No,
I guess
very much not so.
When it's kids, there's always going to be that separation, isn't there?
There's going to be that separation, but also people were literally afraid to work. If you think, like having birthday clowns isn't really a thing in the UK. It's more of a thing in the States, and even then, not so much. Like in the UK, most professional clowns, there are some that work birthdays. They do small kids parties.
The 90s, I remember going to a couple of parties with,
Quite often they're magicians as well.
Yeah.
I know some like talented balloon artists who work as clowns and things. But
some of my best friends are clowns.
But it really damaged the industry. People started, you don't want a clown to pay a clown to come to your kid's birthday party because now they're terrified because of all the creepy clowns. And B, for someone working as a clown performer, if you think it is very rare you're going to the place you're performing and then dressing up as a clown.
Yeah. How many kids' birthday parties are you going to get given a dressing room? Yeah.
Exactly. So it became unsafe to travel to work, and very few people are getting on the tube dressed as a clown, but they're
thank goodness
getting in a car and driving, and that is scary and intimidating.
Yeah. Oh.
And like the industry, I mean, it's probably been hurt in all sorts of ways with COVID, but it, you know, it has been recovering, and circus clowns are very much still a thing, and they very much still fit into these traditions and archetypes of the white face, the August, and the character clown, which we got from Grimaldi, who got it from the Harlequinade, who got it from the Commedia dell'arte, who got it from jesters, who got it from the ancient Romans. So there we go. If you see a clown, don't panic.
That was an excellent little reel back there.
Thank you.
Zooming back out to see the whole time. I'm very well done. Goodness me.
Oh, I should have done the timeline again as a final slide. I didn't. This is the last
sorry,
slide.
I was looking at you anyway.
So there we are. That's a brief history of court jester to clowning.
Well done. Goodness me. I liked it, which is unexpected.
That's because I didn't put too many pictures.
No, that's true. Yeah. That's a lot of history. Excellent.
Isn't it fascinating?
Yeah.
Isn't it fun?
Isn't it fun? I feel bad for clowns now. I've come out of this with renewed sympathy for clowns. It's not that I hated clowns anyway, you understand. It really was just the clown eggs and the phrase. I don't want to become known as some kind of anti-clown podcaster. There's enough of those.
For listeners who somehow are watching or listening to this but didn't listen to our episodes on Men at Arms, this came from some descriptions of the Hall of Faces in the Fools Guild, and if you pop back to that episode you'll get more detail on the bit I missed out of this, which is clowning in the mid to late 20th century in the UK and the tradition of storing clowns' faces on eggs.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes.
But yeah,
last time and didn't.
Yeah, we're not very good at these things. I'm not organised.
I try my best. What I will do is make sure there is a downloadable version of this PowerPoint and PDF for people who want to listen along with their own file instead of watching the video.
Yes, I will send it to you.
Cool.
So yeah, that's everything I've got. Do you have anything to say about clowns, Francine?
No, I think I interrupted as I thought of things, I'm afraid.
Perfect, good, because if you had any questions, I wouldn't be able to answer them. I've learned exactly what I've said here, and that's it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Clown the Rabbit Hole. I'm sorry, I tried so hard not to.
Oh, wait, truth, freedom, justice, reasonably priced love, and a hard-boiled clown egg.
Excellent. We'll be back soon on your regular podcasty whatsits to start talking about interesting times, because the times are somewhat interesting right now.
They are.
In the meantime, of course, you can find us in all the usual places, on Twitter at Make You Fret Pod, on Instagram at The Truth Shall Make You Fret, on Facebook at The Truth Shall Make You Fret. You can email us your thoughts, queries, castles, albatrosses, snacks, and clown eggs, The Truth Shall Make You Fret Pod at gmail.com. I'm assuming if you're here, you already support us on Patreon, because if not, how the fuck did you get this?
Security is not that tight, to be honest, Joanna, but yeah, I'm relying slightly on the honesty system.
I'm assuming if you're here, you at least know about our Patreon. Obviously, please do tell other people about the podcast, rate and review us and all that jazz. Tell us what you think.
Etc. Yes. Tell Joanna what a good job she did on the clowns. I'm very impressed.
And tell me if you've got any fun, interesting facts about clowns that I missed out, because I'm always interested.
She is. It's true. It's bizarre. We start every conversation with Joanna says, Francine, do you have any interesting facts about clowns? And so every meeting, it just starts with disappointment.
Yeah, I'm sad a lot of the time. That's nothing to do with clowns. I've just got very bad mental health.
Oh,
I'm joking. I'm fine.
Oh no. All right. Say something happier so we can sign off on a good note.
Jesus, I can't think of anything happier now. Clowns. The clown industry is recovering.
Hooray.
Hooray. In the meantime, dear listener, don't let us detain you.